been ready ahead of time with my desk standing up. It didn't make my lighting better though. All right, I am looking at attendees rolling in here. A ton of you got here on time. Thank you. Ready for the day. Lots of new names, some old names. All right, I'm just going to give it a second so people can get their sound to the levels they want it to be and get situated here. Another 30 seconds or so, I will get the show on the road. Okay. You have made it. Welcome to our December 11th presentation. This is a fun collaboration with our sister group over in, it used to be called Conservation, but now it's called Customer Energy Solutions. And we are bringing you details about the upcoming DER Interconnection Handbook that City Light will publish at the beginning of the year. And let me give you sort of the lowdown on how to interact with this software if you haven't taken a webinar with the Lighting Design Lab before. We have everybody on mute for the duration, but you can ask questions, find the little question icon somewhere on your screen, depending on what browser you're using. Click that, type whenever you want. It'll go to everybody here in the back end, and we'll get that answered either live or straight to you if it's kind of an easy straight to you answer that's required. The webinar is being recorded, so if you need to step away or if you want to share this later with colleagues, this will be listed on the Lighting Design Lab's website, and we'll get that link to you later in the presentation, also in emails following this. There, just an FYI, there's a chat icon that's disabled for everybody except for the people running the webinar, so you can, it's a read only. You can read if we put a link in there, but you can't type anything in there, so use the questions. And the React I like to use because you're all off camera, we can't see you, so it gives us a little feedback if you find that, and you can give us a little clap or a laugh or a Alyssa, thank you, a heart. Thank you, James. And then really quick, this isn't the Lighting Design Lab webinar, but I did want to make sure everybody knew that we have an HVAC webinar next Tuesday, but a lot of you solar installers came to the Trade Ally meet and greet last month, and I wanted to let you know there's one spot left for this month's Trade Ally office hours, the 8:30, 15-minute spot. So go grab that if you want to talk to staff about solar projects or any of the other incentive programs that we offer. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hillary and Sydney, our trainers today. Also, behind the scenes, we're going to have me, Alex, Amer, Joe, and Joe are going to give you a little information too. So this is all of us. I'm going to go off camera. Hillary and Sydney, thank you for being here, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Katie. And thank you all for joining this morning. We're really excited to be with you today to talk about the new Distributed Energy Resources Interconnection Handbook. My name's Sydney Callahan, and I'm joined by my colleague, Hillary Dolinsky from Eagle Hill Consulting. And we've been supporting City Light with creating resources to help both internal City Light staff and also you as solar installers and trade allies with implementing the new DER handbook that's going to go live on January 2nd. As Katie mentioned, we're also joined by Amer Dalaq, a grid mod engineer at City Light, and Alex Portestaver, the renewable segment manager, who will be available to help answer questions today. But before we get started, I'd love to introduce Joe Fernandi to say a couple words to kick us off.
All right. Thank you so much, Sydney. Good morning, all, and welcome. My name is Joe Fernandi. I'm the Director of Customer Energy Solutions at Seattle City Light. So my team oversees our portfolio of customer energy programs, which include customer solar and storage, as well as demand response. I'm excited to help kick off today's webinar and appreciate you all joining us this morning. So as you may know, we're publishing a new Distributed Energy Resources, or DER, Interconnection Handbook on January 2nd, 2026, which is aligned with our annual update to our Requirements for Electrical Service, or the RESC. We're here today to provide our trade ally community an early look, conduct training, and answer any questions you may have. Now, the handbook was created to help you understand the essential requirements for connecting your solar, battery storage, and other power generation projects to City Light's electrical distribution grid. And this training and the handbook reflect our commitment to continuously improve the customer and installer experience as you navigate the interconnection process. So we hope that the new handbook will improve clarity around the standards and requirements for DER interconnection, namely solar and batteries, standardize the DER electric service application and approval process, and enable accelerated adoption of customer solar and batteries. City Light is excited by the growth in customer adoption of distributed resources, which are playing an increasingly important role in balancing load growth and providing affordable, reliable, and environmentally responsible energy services. And we hope this handbook allows us to better meet the needs of contractors and customers and provides you with clear guidance and direction on how to partner with City Light as customer adoption grows. And we hope that you continue to engage with us to stay in the know on our programs through our Trade Ally Engagement Program, and also to access training and education resources through the lab. So now I'd like to introduce Joe Martek, our Senior Manager of Transmission, Network, and Electrical Services Engineering, to say a few words about how the training was developed. Take it away, Joe.
Great, thanks, Joe. Joe Martek, Transmission Network Electric Service Engineering Manager at Seattle City Light. We work closely with our customers and third-party installers throughout every stage of the DER connection to the grid, so we understand the need for better information on utility requirements. My team and the electric service aides, the representatives, we're all committed to supporting you as we follow the new DER handbook process. The DER Interconnection Handbook is the culmination of efforts which we hope will bring clarity to the interconnection process. Our staff has completed with their own training on the handbook, and we're prepared to navigate this new process along with all of you. The utility has partnered with Sydney and Hillary at Eagle Hill Consulting, to create today's webinar, and they've been great. They've been very helpful through the whole process. We hope this webinar will help you feel informed and prepared to adopt these new changes in January. So with that, thanks, Sydney. Go ahead.
All right, let's dive in. So let's talk a little bit about what we're looking to do this morning. So our primary goal, as Joe and Joe have mentioned, is to make sure that you feel confident with the handbook starting in January. So specifically, when we get to the end of our time together today, we hope that you'll be able to know a little bit more about the purpose of the handbook and the key changes that are involved in the handbook. We hope that you'll be able to have a basic idea of the phases of the interconnection process and describe the requirements for applicants in each phase. And we also know that you play an important role in interfacing with customers. And so we hope that to be able to empower you to fulfill that role as well. And then ultimately to be able to locate all of the new resources, including the handbook itself, that are going to be available come January. So to meet those learning objectives, we'll take a look at what our time together this morning will look like. We're going to start with an overview of the interconnection process, and we're going to highlight what's changing in the new handbook. So if you only stay on for the first 15 or 20 minutes, hopefully we can get you the key information within that time. And then the rest of our time together, we'll go into a little bit more detail on each of the phases of the process. So we're going to talk about the lifespan of a DER application once it gets submitted, and walk you through the 5 phases. And then level 4 requests, which are those large DER projects, follow a slightly different process from others. And so we're going to cover those requests separately towards the end. We know that those are pretty rare. And so we want to make sure that you have the information about them in case they do come up. But it'll be a little bit less detailed than some of the other things that we cover. And then finally, we will close out with sharing the new resources that are designed specifically to help you with the new handbook. As Katie mentioned earlier, if you do have questions throughout today's webinar, please feel free to use that questions tab. It might be in the upper right corner of your screen to submit questions at any time. And then we're going to pause at least 2 or 3 times today to answer those questions. And if we don't get to your question for some reason, we will make sure that we follow up with you and include it in the FAQs that we'll be publishing in the new year. So with that, before we dive in, we'd like to take a quick moment to check in with you on your current level of comfort. When we refer to the City Light DER interconnection process, how comfortable are you with it today based on what you know? So you should see a poll pop up right in the middle of your screen. It is anonymous, and so you can feel free to be honest with your feedback and let us know how you're feeling today about the interconnection process with City Light. So you've got everything, if you scroll down, from very uncomfortable to very comfortable, depending on where you are. All right, and it looks like we have got a good mix today with the lowest number of people feeling very comfortable. So we'll see what we can do to make some progress today. We are going to ask the exact same question at the end of today's webinars to see if we've made any progress. And it'll also help us to know what else we can do in the future to improve clarity and offer follow-up sessions if we need to. So appreciate your feedback there, and we can go ahead and shift back over to the slides again. Okay, so thank you for all of that feedback. Now we'll go ahead and dive in with some background on DERs at City Light and then some of those key changes for 2026. So starting with a little bit of background. As many of you are aware, many utilities across the country face some challenges when it comes to interconnecting DERs. And a lot of that comes down to a lack of clarity and standardization. As you all know best, it's a constantly changing environment, which creates its own set of challenges as we all adapt to regulatory changes, priorities, et cetera. So to address some of these challenges and help achieve the utility's goal of producing 250 megawatts of customer solar by 2043, City Light recognized the need to improve its processes and ultimately the customer experience. And that is what ultimately led to the creation of the DER Interconnection Handbook, and ultimately the reason why we're all here today talking about it. So now we'll talk a little bit about what's actually changing in 2026 and what's staying the same. So there's really 5 key changes, and I'll review them at a high level on this slide, and then we'll share a little bit more detail on the slides that follow this one. So the first change is that there is now a singular resource dedicated specifically to DERs. So previously, all of the information about DERs was housed in the requirements for electric service connection, or the RESC. But beginning in January, that information on DERs is going to be found in the new handbook. And so we'll make sure that you have the link to that as well. The second change is that the interconnection review levels have been updated, and there are a few new technical screens that City Light is going to conduct during the process. We're going to briefly touch on these today. And that actually leads to the third change, which is that there are now documented processes and a suite of resources to help both City Light as well as installers with implementing these processes. So a lot more detail out there than there has been in the past. One of the new processes is that starting January 2nd, applicants will now submit a signed attestation form following the construction of their DER that verifies that it's compliant with safety and regulatory standards. We'll talk more about that today as well. And finally, the last key change is that the prior interconnection agreement templates have been updated and are now going to have a counter signature from City Light before an applicant moves forward with construction. So we'll talk more about that as well today. So we've talked about what's changing, but there are a lot of aspects of this that are staying the same. So applicants are going to continue to use the existing application portal to submit solar applications. And you're going to continue with your existing contacts, either the electric service representative or the electric service engineer, ESR or ESE, throughout the application cycle. Applicants are also going to continue to be expected to abide by all the relevant requirements and standards that are in existence today, everything in the RESC and the SES. But now we'll take a closer look at each of those 5 changes. All right, and we'll start with the handbook itself. So the new handbook expands on the information that was previously captured in section 5 of the RESC and is now going to include a lot more detail. So you'll see some of the things that it covers on this slide, but really, it's going to have more information about the standards and codes, a lot more information about the application process, as well as the interconnection process itself. As well as the things that have always been included around requirements and dispute resolution mechanisms. The hope is that this new handbook can provide a lot more transparency about the DER process for you as installers and customers, and that ultimately this transparency can help us all. So it can help you submit high quality applications. It can help City Light with the timely processing of those applications, and ultimately give us all a better shared understanding of the expectations for both the customer and the utility. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at those new interconnection levels. Okay, so as we mentioned, the handbook is going to introduce updates to the current interconnection review levels. So level 1 will now refer to DERs with a nameplate capacity of less than 12 kilowatts that seek to interconnect to the loop radial system. And for context, the majority of DER applications are going to fall into this category. From there, we move into level 2, which describes DERs between 12 and 100 kilowatts. And then level 3, which is going to be those DERs with the nameplate capacity between 100 and 500 kilowatts. And then finally, level 4 captures those large scale DERs above 500 kilowatts. And so as we've mentioned, DERs of this size are very rare, and they do require a slightly different process than others. So we will touch on that today at the end of the session, but for the bulk of our time together, we're going to talk about the process for level 1 through 3 applications. And just one other thing to note, the process for DERs in network is not changing. So today's webinar is not going to touch on that process, but we can collect questions about network requests if you do have them. All right. This next slide is going to show the full interconnection process divided into 5 phases. So we're going to talk about each of these phases today. That's really going to be the bread and butter of today's webinar. But at a high level, all DER applications start with an intake and application review process. And assuming that the application is complete and includes all of the necessary supporting materials, which we'll talk about today, the application will then advance to technical and supplemental screens. In this phase, so City Light engineers will conduct different screens depending on the size of the DER. And so if any of those technical screens fail, then City Light would move into what's called supplemental screens to gather a little bit more information about the request and its impact. If the applicant can't modify the DER to pass those technical and supplemental screens, then the utility would move into engineering studies. So that's that phase at the bottom there. And that would be an opportunity to take a deeper dive into the impacts of that DER construction. So not every DER will require supplemental screens or engineering studies. In fact, these are very rare, but we are going to cover these phases so that you feel prepared in case these situations do come up. You can kind of know what to expect. So once the DER request has passed all the screens and studies and it's compliant with the utility standards, then DER construction would begin, the exciting stuff. So once the DER is constructed, then the utility would review the attestations, enroll the applicant in billing, energize the DER, and then ultimately close out the application. So we're going to reference this map throughout today's webinar to help guide us through our modules. I will say you don't need to memorize this perfectly. We are going to provide additional resources, and you will have access to the slides. We'll be sending those out likely sometime next week. But just to let you know, this is kind of a grounding slide as we move through today's presentation. As we mentioned, the 4th change refers to the new attestation requirement. So this requirement of collecting the signed attestation form is completely new. So this is a piece that we'll spend some time on today. Essentially, this new requirement is just asking applicants to sign or attest that their DER meets all of the authority having jurisdiction and utility requirements. So the applicant will also attest that they have all the necessary permits and operating materials, and that the DER has appropriate signage and labeling. So not a lot of new requirements in terms of what you're attesting to, but it's just the sign off that will be a new piece here. And so essentially the applicant is going to sign a form that City Light provides, and you'll see on that slide right here, that's screenshot shows what the form is. And so it's going to confirm that they've conducted all these tests and that the DER is compliant. And then once that's submitted, then City Light would issue the permission to operate letter. So we'll talk more about that timing and kind of the document flow today. And speaking of additional documents, the last change up front is the new interconnection agreements themselves. So the agreement templates have been updated, and there's now going to be one form for level 1 and 2 requests, and then one form for levels 3 and 4. There's also going to be a couple of changes related to the timing for these interconnection agreements. So previously, the applicant would sign and submit the interconnection agreement with their application materials. But now going forward, City Light will actually send out the interconnection agreement later in the process. So it'll be signed by the applicant and countersigned by the utility after the application has been reviewed and the screens have been conducted. So we'll take a look at that process later today as well. Okay. We have covered a lot up front. And before we take a deeper dive into each of the phases of the interconnection process, we'd like to open it up for any questions about what we've covered so far. So again, please feel free to use the questions tab at the top of your screen to submit questions. And we'll take a look at those now and we'll read those out. Okay, first question. Is the attestation form an online fillable screen / document? And I can take that one. As of now, it will be in PDF format. So that would be something that your ESR or ESE would provide. Okay, the next question is around timeline. So can you provide an expected timeline for the review process for the city to complete? And that is a great segue. We'll be talking all about timelines in our next section, so we'll hold off on that one for just a moment here, but we will be covering that today. I'll give it just another minute. If folks are typing, we'll wait for anything to pop up. And I'm just giving it a moment for questions to flow in. I just got a note that there are more questions flowing in, but there seems to be a little bit of a delay for me. So Hillary, if you see them, feel free to read them out. It seems like there's just a little bit of a lag on my end.
Yeah, no problem. So we have a question. Are there separate or additional requirements for BESS, BESS, or is this just associated with DER size and level? To my understanding, this is specific to DERs, but would welcome my City Light colleagues to answer that if needed.
Right, yeah, this handbook is all-encompassing for DERs, so since BESS is considered a DER as well, it follows the same
Okay, I think I'm back up and running. Amer, this might be another one as well. So it's, why is Seattle City Light maintaining a no export position with respect to DERs connected to network grids?
Yeah, so the way our City Lights network grid is designed, there are several protection devices like network protectors in place because it's all intertwined and interconnected together. So that would typically usually trip those. So one way to protect that is to not allow DERs to export.
Another question, what is the major benefit to the solar customer with the new process? Anything that you would add in there?
I would say a major benefit is to standardize the process, particularly as well from a technical aspect. We've standardized and formalized that process so that across the board, and more importantly for larger scale solar as well, we've kind of worked on having what we call like fast track processes from an engineering review perspective, to hopefully expedite those processes and not having them sit in queue for such a long time.
And I see another question from Laura about when in the process the attestation form is submitted, and we will talk all about timing, but at a high level, the attestation form will be submitted after construction of the DER. Another question, is this just for commercial or residential as well?
It's for both, for all sizes and all customers.
And then a follow-up to that, will EV chargers be looped into the same process, or are those remaining as a separate deprioritized review?
Yeah, at this time, EV chargers are a separate prioritized review. They're not included in the handbook as part of the technical review process or the interconnection process.
Thank you. That's all that we see right now, but again, we will pause again later in today's presentation for additional questions. So feel free to use the same questions bucket that you've been submitting through, and we'll follow up on the additional questions in our next Q&A. But with that, I'll hand it over to Hillary to talk through the first phase, all about the application and intake process.
Thank you, Sydney. So the first phase of the interconnection process is the intake and application review. So in this module, we'll cover the different types of electric service requests, the various pathways a DER application can take throughout the process, and what is needed to prepare for and submit a DER application. Looking back at our map, these are the activities that we'll cover in this module. There are many different types of solar electric service applications that City Light offers. The 6 you see here are currently what's listed on City Light's website, but today our webinar is going to focus on solar interconnections specifically. There are several resources and standards that help guide an applicant through a DER interconnection application and installation. As installers, you're likely very familiar with these resources, but if you're not, they outline crucial safety, regulatory, and performance standards required by the utility for DER operation. Previously, requirements for DERs were captured in Section 5 of the RESC. So in an effort to better standardize the process and provide more transparency about what is involved, City Light has expanded upon this section and created the new DER Interconnection Handbook. The new handbook outlines the various pathways a solar request can take. So here we see a very busy and complex slide that aims to summarize how a DER application moves through the process depending on its size and how it performs on technical screens. You do not need to memorize this and will not be expected to reference this when working with customers or City Light on a DER application. But the goal here is to share a look behind the curtain at what happens at City Light in between the different stages and milestones. For smaller DERs like level 1s, you can see they undergo screen A, screen B, and if everything passes, they proceed to DER construction. Larger DERs, like L3s, require at least 7 screens and potentially more, depending on the screen results. All of these screens are summarized in detail in the handbook, so customers will now have greater insight into what happens to their DER application. We will also revisit these screens in our next module. But before a DER application even gets to screens, it must be reviewed for accuracy and completion. This is a very important step as it determines who is assigned to the application and what screens are required. Here you'll see a summary of the application requirements and documents that must be submitted before a DER application can advance to the initial screens. What we've listed here are the elements of the application that are important for DERs. The full list of application requirements is mentioned on CityLight's website. In addition to the website, there is a service application checklist that can help make sure all items are received. This upfront review helps make the initial screen process more efficient. If an applicant has questions about their application submission, they can reach out to CityLight by emailing scl_serviceapplications@seattle.gov. When the applicant has all of their materials ready, they can proceed with submitting the DER application online. CityLight has an application for electric service portal where applicants begin their application submission. Once they complete the portal process, they will email their supporting documents to that SCL Service Applications inbox. Anticipating DER application review timelines can play a large role in how applicants, trade allies, and CityLight collaborate on DER energization. These timelines are published in the handbook, so everyone involved can have a sense of how long certain activities will take. The timeline we see here is for those application review activities we just discussed. So CityLight anticipates 10 business days to conduct the initial application review. If the applicant needs to submit corrected or additional materials, they have 30 business days to do so before their spot in the queue is adjusted. All timelines in the handbook are estimates, and CityLight is committed to putting forth a good faith effort to try and meet these timelines where possible. But there may be unplanned interruptions or delays that occur. CityLight will do its best to inform applicants as soon as possible when their application review might be delayed. We will have a similar table to this at the end of each module that summarizes the activities we review, and we'll also circulate a one-pager that captures the timelines for all activities from our 5 phases in one place. So hopefully that can be a handy and helpful resource when planning installations. The next phase of the interconnection process includes technical and supplemental screens. In this module, we'll talk about the importance of screens and why they matter. We'll provide an overview of technical screens C through H and supplemental screens I, J, and K. We'll share guidance on how to review screen results with the applicant if they come to you with questions, and we'll walk through the options for resolving screen fails. Looking back at our map, these are the activities that we'll cover in this module. Before we jump into the screens themselves, let's spend some time exploring why they're so crucial in the interconnection process. And screens are important for a variety of reasons. Conducting screens ensures an element of safety and protection, both for the grid itself and utility workers. Screens help us standardize solar across the city, making sure that each project meets the same regulatory standards while creating consistent and reliable access. And finally, technical screens can help flag important updates needed either by the applicant or the utility, ultimately improving customer service by raising these concerns early. Let's start with an overview of the technical screens and how they relate to each other. An L1 through L3 DER applications start with screen A. If that passes, L1 will advance to screen B. Since screen B is only required for L1, the other levels advance to screens C and D. If an L2 passes these screens, it will advance to the next phase. Because of their size and scale, L3 must undergo screens E through H in addition to C and D. If an L3 passes all technical screens, it will advance to DER construction. If any of the technical screens fail for any level, the DER request can either advance to supplemental screens to gather more information or to grid modifications. Here are the titles for each of the technical screens. And again, don't worry about memorizing these. They're going to be summarized in the new handbook, and you'll have these slides to reference in the future. Many of these screens are a part of the current process when reviewing a DER application. They just have a new name moving forward. Some of the screens, like Screen B and Screen D, are new. CityLight staff who review interconnections have completed a similar training to what you're watching today, but with much more detail about how to perform those screens internally and their unique role in the process. Once technical screens are complete, CityLight will inform applicants of their results. If any screens fail, CityLight will work with the applicant to decide what to do next. We'll review those resolution options per screen on the next slide, but in general, applicants can either ask that CityLight conduct supplemental screens, reduce the DER nameplate capacity, or pursue grid modifications. If screens pass, CityLight will send a copy of the interconnection agreement to the applicant for signature. The applicant then returns the signed A to CityLight for countersignature. And more information on that process is going to be covered in a later module. Here we see a few potential solutions for each screen failure. Some resolutions involve replacing secondary transformers, replacing protective equipment, or reducing the DER nameplate capacity. Ultimately, if the applicant does not want to reduce or modify their DER nameplate capacity, they can agree to proceed with supplemental screens. Here's a summary of the 3 supplemental screens, I, J, and K. Supplemental screens are used for a variety of reasons. First is that they can help clarify borderline cases. So if the DER application barely fails one of the initial technical screens and there's not immediate mitigation, the supplemental screen can help determine whether the project still has minimal impact and can proceed without a full system impact study. Supplemental screens can help avoid unnecessary studies. So by providing additional context or analysis, supplemental screens can prevent projects from being routed to time-consuming and potentially costly studies unnecessarily. And they help capture local conditions. Supplemental screens can incorporate site-specific factors like feeder topology, load variability, or existing DERs that those initial screens might not fully address. Supplemental screens do not happen often. Again, most applications pass the technical screens, but if failures do happen, it's good to know all of the options available. If supplemental screens happen, CityLight will relay those results back to the applicant. At this stage, if supplemental screens fail, the applicant can agree to a scoping meeting to discuss the DER application and the need for possible engineering studies with the utility. If supplemental screens pass, the DER request is back on track and will continue to interconnection agreements and DER construction. So to close out the screens module, here are the anticipated timelines for the activities we just discussed. CityLight will inform the applicant of their technical screen status within 15 business days for L1 or 20 business days for L2 or L3. L1 has a shorter turnaround time because only 2 screens are required. The applicant will then have 30 business days to resolve screen failures or agree to continue with supplemental screens. And if supplemental screens happen, CityLight will have 15 business days from that decision to conduct those screens. This concludes our technical and supplemental screens module, which is the biggest one of our webinar. I'll turn it over to Sydney to talk about the very rare engineering studies.
Thanks so much, Hillary. Okay, so the third phase of the interconnection process involves engineering studies. So in this section, we'll talk about scoping meetings where we determine what studies might be needed, the engineering studies themselves, and then what the communication will look like internally at CityLight as well as with you as the installer along the way. So looking back at our process map, we'll direct our attention to the bottom center for this module as we talk through it. I'll also note up front that the engineering studies content is only relevant for level 2, 3, and 4 DER applications. An L1 request under 12 kilowatts would not require engineering studies. So as Hillary mentioned, the wide majority of requests are not going to need to go through engineering studies like we're talking about here. So to identify if engineering studies are needed, and if so, which ones, City Light will facilitate what's called a scoping meeting with the applicant. And so these can be virtual or in person, and they come at no cost to the applicant. So during the scoping meeting, the attendees will discuss the project, any concerns or changes that might be needed, and what engineering studies might be best to help learn more about any of the upgrades that could be needed. So solar installers and trade allies are invited to these scoping meetings to ask questions and participate in the discussion. This is a great opportunity to hear directly from the utility engineers who have been reviewing the request, and then chart a viable path forward together. After that scoping meeting, City Light will send a scoping meeting form to the applicant that's going to summarize what was discussed and agreed to during the meeting and put that all in writing. This form would also include any mention of costs associated with completing the studies. And then at that point, it's up to the applicant to decide what to do next. If they want to proceed with the engineering studies, withdraw their application, modify the design, or pursue system upgrades at that point. So if engineering studies take place, City Light will coordinate the time and materials billing with the applicant as needed. And after City Light conducts the studies, they'll then produce what's called a study report that would document the findings and conclusions. And on the right, you'll see an example of what that might look like. But essentially, it would be a summary of the studies that have been conducted. And that would be sent to the applicant for their records. Again, these are extremely rare, but we did want to touch on these just so that you're aware of what that might look like, particularly for those larger or more complex requests. So before we wrap up this engineering studies section, we do want to briefly touch on the estimated timelines for these studies. So again, here you'll see the estimated timing for key steps in the process. And as you can see, conducting engineering studies can extend the timeline for processing a DER application quite a bit, but also remember that these activities on the screen are extremely rare. The majority of DER applications that the utility receives do not go through any of these steps. And finally, just another reminder, as Hillary mentioned, that the timelines that we cover throughout today's presentation are present in the handbook and will also be included in the materials shared after the fact. So we will pause again for questions. I know a couple more had come in through the chat, and Amer had answered some, but just in case folks can't see those, I'll read out some of those answers. So one of the questions that came through while we were going through was, how would the process work to add a battery storage system to an existing solar system? And the answer to that is that you would submit a new service application for the battery storage design. And then there was another question that said, as Amer mentioned, DERs are not allowed to export currently. Could this change in the future with DERM's implementation at Seattle City Light? And Amer clarified that DERs are not allowed to export only on City Light's network area system, which is primarily located in the Seattle downtown area and in the University of Washington area. It could potentially change as DER technology advances, and City Light will continue to reevaluate. And then I do see another new question, Amer, that came in, which is if an L1 fails and a reason is needing a transformer upgrade, does that mean that we could not resubmit until Seattle City Light has approved and completed the transformer upgrade?
Yeah, I'd like to clarify what you mean by resubmit. As if it's resubmitting the application, prior to that, one mitigation would be to reduce the DER nameplate capacity to be just below the transformer's capacity. But if the applicant would love to still keep their nameplate capacity and move forward, then yeah, operation of the DER can't start until the transformer is upgraded.
And I see Joe has joined us as well. Was there something that you wanted to add?
So I was going to add that I think we're moving, in a way that we're going to let you guys energize, and we'll upgrade the transformer as needed. That's a big if. I'm usually in this situation, it's more like small residential transformers. But if you had a large array and you had a pad mount transformer and you needed to upgrade that, that's kind of a different scenario. We may need that before we can energize. So there's some more nuance to that. But we're certainly happy to work with you and make sure it gets connected.
Great. I see another question, which is, will screen A or B include a voltage rise check for L1 systems?
It will not. The voltage rise would be for DERs greater than 12 kilowatts.
And then I see Jesse's question, which was a clarification that we see lots of systems go through engineering review and we see lots fail. I guess I'm not sure on the comment with engineering is rare. We're talking about residential systems under 25 kW with solar and storage. And I think the clarification is likely from what I was sharing about the engineering studies, which are separate than just a standard engineering review. So to your point, yes, all applications over that 12 kilowatts would go through engineering review. What we were referring to with the engineering studies being rare would be those additional studies such as impact, facilities, feasibility studies. Those would be the rare instances. Great. I see another question, which is, with the DER handbook complete, what comes next? VPPs, TOU rates with net metered customers is the question.
So the handbook definitely lays the foundation work for our DER interconnection process for internally and externally for you, the customers as well. So yeah, definitely with this new technology, new programs that are out there with the other utilities across the nation, we definitely are having conversations regarding these programs. One, being community solar, potentially, net TOU rates would. For net metered customers, we are having these conversations internally and working on developing programs for these new programs and that you see coming up. So I'll just say conversations are coming up, and we are having those to hopefully implement in the near future.
Thanks, Amer. Another question I see, folks hearing about long lead times for some transformers. So the question is, how is that impacting City Light?
Yeah, so we still have long lead times for certain transformers. The residential ones, not as much. The overhead pole mounted transformers, we have those in stock. The longer lead time are for our CS units or our pad mounts, so the larger transformer services. We're still about 2 years for lead time for those. Most likely it won't affect most of the DERs, but in certain scenarios it could.
All right. I think we'll pause there, and then we will have one more Q&A period later in today's session. So keep the questions coming. We really appreciate your engagement and the questions. But with that, I will hand it back over to Hillary to talk about the next phase of the process.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Amer and Joe, for the answers during the Q&A. So the fourth phase of the interconnection process covers DER construction. In this module, we'll go over the new interconnection agreement templates, and we'll talk about the timing of the IAs and the PTC that take place before the DER is constructed. Looking back at our map, these are the activities in the top right that we'll cover in this module. Interconnection agreements outline the terms and conditions governing the interconnection. This is crucial to complete prior to any DER construction in order to help manage expectations and confirm responsibilities. So moving forward, there will be two templates, one for L1 and L2, and a separate one for L3 and L4 DERs. Starting January 2nd, when the handbook is published, each interconnection agreement must be signed by the applicant and countersigned by CityLight before a permission to construct is issued at any level, including L1s. So here's a process flow that shows the order of these documents. As you can see, the IA happens first. CityLight sends the appropriate IA to the applicant, who signs and returns it to CityLight. And this is a slight deviation from current practice, where applicants are signing the IA and submitting it with their application materials. Moving forward, that will not be required at the time of application submission, and instead, after all technical screens and engineering studies occur, if those happen, CityLight is going to send the appropriate template of the interconnection agreement to the applicant for them to sign. Once they sign and return it, CityLight will countersign and send a copy to the applicant along with their PTC. And the PTC is what grants permission to the applicant to construct their DER and obtain all necessary AHJ permits. Here are the estimated timelines for these activities that we just discussed. So CityLight will send the applicant the appropriate version of the interconnection agreement for signature within 5 business days of notifying the applicant of their screen results. The applicant will then sign and return the IA within 10 business days, and CityLight will countersign the IA and return a copy to the applicant along with their PTC within 5 business days. Once CityLight issues the PTC, the applicant can construct their DER. The applicant is responsible for obtaining all permits necessary from the AHJ, which can include building, civil, mechanical, or other permits or authorizations. Next, we'll look at the final phase, DER project closeout. In this module, we'll provide an overview of those new commissioning and testing attestations. We'll share reminders about submitting final payments. We'll talk about energizing the DER once the utility issues the PTO, permission to operate, and we'll review DER operation and maintenance requirements post-energization. Here we are looking back at our map. We're in the final phase. The commissioning and testing attestations are a new requirement of applicants. Applicants must attest that their DER meets the required safety, regulatory, and performance standards. To make this more structured for applicants, CityLight has created a form that they will simply fill out and sign. A copy of the attestation form is included in the appendix of the interconnection agreement, so applicants will have a chance to see what they'll need to attest to before constructing their DER. Copies of both the interconnection agreements and the attestations will also be available on CityLight's website for download. After the DER is commissioned, the applicant will return the signed commissioning and testing attestation. CityLight will then review the attestation and inspect the DER as needed. Before the utility can issue the permission to operate, the applicant must pay for all fees and interconnection costs. So here's a summary of potential charges that could be billed. The applicant would be informed in advance of any of these potential charges. Fees are currently outlined in the Utilities Department Policy and Procedures, or DPPs, and fees related to interconnections are mentioned in DPP 417 and DPP 305. The handbook itself does not feature any cost changes. The DPPs would need to be updated before cost changes can go into effect, and DPPs are open to a period of public comment before they're ratified. So you'll have an opportunity to be informed of potential cost changes before they're implemented. Once the applicant reconciles their billing and the signed attestation is received, the utility will issue the PTO, which initiates net metering enablement. So let's unpack the timelines for these activities on the next slide. The applicant must notify City Light 15 business days before they intend to commission their DER. City Light can then decide if they'd like to have a staff member present to witness commissioning. After that, the applicant will sign and return their commissioning and testing attestation. Within 5 business days of receiving that and confirming that all payments are received, City Light will issue the PTO and request net meter enablement. Even once the DER is energized, the applicant is still expected to uphold its DER to comply with applicable regulations. The handbook will summarize key operations and maintenance requirements for the applicant to monitor after their DER is energized. Some key requirements include ongoing utility access to the DER, insurance and record keeping, and continuity in DER configuration and settings. And as a refresher, here are 2 sections in the new handbook that summarize DER requirements. These are not changing and they're not new requirements, but still important to revisit to maintain compliance. We've noted which sections these are captured in. Once the handbook is published, you'll be able to look at section 16 to see the DER equipment requirements and section 18 to review additional technology-specific requirements. And this successfully closes out our DER project closeout module. I'll now hand it over to Sydney to talk about the L4 request process.
Thanks, Hillary. So this will be our last section before we close out with some resources and next steps. So as we mentioned, level 4 DER applications are pretty rare, but we do want to make sure that we provide just a little bit of information on the basics and how they differ from other applications. So on the next slide, we'll do just a quick recap of what we mean when we say level 4 requests. So level 4 requests is going to refer to DERs that are either inverter-based resources with a nameplate capacity above 500 kilowatts, machine-based resources, or inverter-based resources that didn't pass the prior supplemental screen. So that's kind of a catch-all there. And when we look at the overall interconnection process, there's really one big difference that we're zooming in on here for level 4 requests, which is that level 1, 2, and 3 applications go through technical and maybe even supplemental screens, but level 4 applications are actually going to move directly to a scoping meeting, and they will not undergo any screens prior to that. So the good news is that the rest of the process stays the same, and the hope is that by streamlining this process a little bit, it can help to cut down on applications bouncing around to different engineering teams and things like that. So it'll just move directly to a scoping meeting to discuss next steps and any engineering studies that would be reviewed. So during that scoping meeting, that would be discussed. And then following the application or following those studies, rather, the application would advance to construction and close out. So we have covered quite a bit today, and we do still expect to wrap up a little bit early, but we do want to take some time to wrap up together and make sure that you're aware of the available resources and key dates. So to start off that wrap up process, we'll open it up for questions again. And I do see that some of them have already been answered in the chat. So let me read some of those out just in case folks aren't looking through all of the questions. So one of the questions was, are there any plans to release a hosting capacity map like some of the other utilities around the country and region? And the answer is not at this time. And Joe, I see you're coming on. Anything that you want to add in there?
I was going to say we are working on that, but we don't have a definitive timeline for that at the moment.
Thank you. Another question, how will the customer sign? Will it just be an e-sign software or just a PDF for the customer to print and sign? And the answer is that it'll be Adobe Sign. Another follow-up question, are there any plans to implement Solar App Plus?
Not at this time. It looks like Solar App Plus is a permitting to expedite permitting. That's usually not handled by the utility. It's handled by SDCI or the authority having jurisdiction, LNI, if it's outside of Seattle. So not at this time, no.
Another follow-up, will we, and I imagine that means the solar installer, be CC'd on all communications during the process? And my 2 cents, I believe it depends on who's submitting and who provides contact information with the application. But if you were part of the application submission process, the expectation would be yes, you would be kept involved throughout that communication. But Joe Martek, anything that you would add to that? I think it's probably very dependent on who submits and what contact info they give.
Yeah, I mean, most likely the answer is yes. If the owner wants, or whoever's going to be the legal property owner wants you to be involved, and most of the time, yeah, we do work directly with the installers and the third party.
Yep. Another question, do we need a knife style disconnect switch if we are installing batteries with built-in inverters if we're not tying in any generation into those batteries? Can we use a breaker disconnect or an e-stop instead of the knife style switch?
A knife style switch, a knife style disconnect switch would still be required.
Okay, and then another question about contact information. So will the interconnections be sent to the utility account owner with the contractor CC'd in email notifications? And then will the attestation be sent to the utility account owner that signed the interconnection application, or will it be sent to the applicant?
I think it's the legal property owner that has to sign those documents, since they will be the ones that'll have the array and collecting energy credits and everything, and the interconnection agreement.
Yes. Let's see. Follow-up question. I believe this one was answered earlier, which was, will the attestation also be sent through Adobe Sign? And I believe that's the one that Alex had previously answered and said yes. And then another question, is it on the roadmap for Seattle City Light to allow voltage rise / transformer loading problems to be solved via smart inverter functionality?
John, I will say, yeah, we are continuously evaluating the technology and the effects, the DER technology and the effects that it has on the grid. So if we feel that it's feasible and safe to allow this, then we definitely will. But we continuously monitor and evaluate the new technology to hopefully make everyone's lives easier and smoother. So yeah.
All right. That is all the questions that I see right now. So we can go ahead and move on. But again, feel free to continue to put questions in the chat. And we will be publishing a solar FAQ at some time in the new year. And so we can make sure that your questions are captured there, as well as any other follow-up from the webinar today. All righty. So as we start to close out, we promised that we would revisit our opening poll and see if we've made any progress on the clarity front today. So you should see a poll pop up just like the first time in your screen. And so you can go ahead and let us know how you're feeling now that you've completed the webinar. Also open to any feedback as we start to wrap up here. So we appreciate your time and would love to hear a little bit about if we're moving the needle, and that'll help us to identify what other support we can provide in the new year as the handbook goes live. So I see some responses starting to come in. Feel free to keep filling that out for a moment here. We'll give you a second to find it in your screen there. It looks like as folks are populating a bit, we're moving the needle a little bit. So moving a little bit from very uncomfortable and somewhat uncomfortable, getting folks at least feeling a little bit more neutral. And again, we appreciate you taking the time to fill that out. Our biggest goal is to increase your comfort level with this and to make sure that you have the resources that you need. So no matter how you're feeling, if you're feeling like a pro with the new application process or the new interconnection process rather, or you're still a little bit uncomfortable with it, we know that there are also some holidays coming up and you may want to refer back to materials. So we'll show you where you're going to be able to do that as we transition back to the PowerPoint here in a moment. Alrighty, so to help folks with referencing these things in the new year, we want to make you aware of some of the key resources that are going to be sent out. So the first is the actual handbook, which is going to be published on the City Light website on January 2nd, 2026. This is that extensive document that's going to be a resource to understand the full interconnection process, especially from the applicant's perspective. So everything that we covered today will be included in the handbook, and the handbook would provide even more detail than what we went through today. The City Light website is also a great resource to find guidance documents as well as those new interconnection agreements. And then again, the attestation form will also be available there as well. And that'll be available as an appendix in the interconnection agreements also. So the website, if you go to it right now, it has not yet been updated because these requirements in the handbook don't go into effect until January, but beginning in January, you'll see those updates reflected there. And if you do have any questions about the handbook or about the interconnection process, do feel free to use one of those email addresses that we provided earlier in today's session, or reach out to Amer, Alex, Joe, any of the folks that have joined us today. We'll be happy to answer your questions. So as we wrap up, we really appreciate your time and attention to this today. We know how important these updates are to you all and how you do your work. And so we appreciate your commitment to joining today to learn the latest and greatest. Before you leave today, we would appreciate it if you could use a little bit of the remaining time to provide a little bit of feedback on today's webinar and whether or not this met your needs, and what we can do in the future to continue to provide clarity and transparency throughout this process. So we'll place the link to it in the chat if you're able to click that, or if you are able to use your phone to use the QR code on the screen, that'll be another way that you can access the feedback form. So you can either use the QR code or we'll put the link, but we'd love to hear from you on if there's anything else that we can do to help meet your needs. But with that, we appreciate you joining, and you will receive a follow-up with the recording from today as well as the slides from today in the coming weeks. So thank you again for your time today, and hope everybody has a great rest of the afternoon.